Domestic violence is a pattern of behavior that one partner uses to have power and control over the other. It doesn't stay at home. It comes to work with either the victim or the perpetrator. And so the victim is distracted by what could potentially be happening at home or by repeated phone calls or emails that they're getting from the perpetrator, trying to anticipate, are they going to come to work? And if they do, what are they going to do there? And the perpetrator using the workplace as a way to stalk or surveil their victim. Where are they going? What are they doing? And it doesn't just affect the two that are involved, it affects everyone.
I want to work in a safe environment. I want the people that I work with to feel safe. It's important just because as human beings it's important for us to feel that sense of safety. And it's important for a work environment because you can't work effectively if you're frightened, if you're anxious, if you feel threatened in some way.
As an employer, the Cambridge Public Health Department plays an important role in preventing domestic violence and supporting its employees. Our organization has experience in creating a domestic violence workplace policy, and we hope that hearing the experiences of our policy team will help other organizations take this on.
More employers that have safety and security of all their workplace, all their workers and their workplace in mind, the better. In order to start working on a domestic violence policy within your organization, it has to start at the highest level. There needs to be buy-in at the executive level. Do they understand what this issue is and how important it is and why we need to approach it? I think you absolutely need to have the people that can make decisions at the table. You need to have someone who's championing the cause, who's going to push it forward, make sure that you get through the meetings and that you are moving ahead, and really a buy-in from everyone that this is an important project to work on.
Like any other projects and activities at the department, it requires the input of my senior team and other staff. And so this is a topic in domestic violence that's been an area of focus for many years. And so I've decided that this is an area where we should allocate resources, staff, time, and support. And so based on that, we've framed a policy around it, not only within our department, but something that we plan to push out across the city. And so it is a priority here, and I'm very proud of this initiative here in Cambridge.
So the head of our department was really the first stop, and the rest of the management team then bought into the policy development process, and then we decided who would participate in that. Absolutely, it can some of the initial interest can come from anywhere in the department or in the organization, but no doubt the person at the top needs to say, this is important for a safe workplace, and please go ahead with the process.
After you have buy-in from people at the executive level, you need to think about who will actually be at the table creating this policy and pushing it forward. Think about who you need input from. Is it managers, other staff members? It's important that everyone in the organization has a voice in this process.
I think it's really important to cast as broad a net as possible, making sure that you do have a committee or a team or whatever the development process is that can represent as best as possible the staff that they're going to be working with.
With our organization, people volunteered to be part of the group to work on this policy. I would think some people might have to be assigned, based on different places and where people work.
Begin the discussion with staff early. Let people know that it's something that you're considering, that it's something that you take very seriously, and invite input. I think that the best way to get people to buy into a project is to let them know about it ahead of time and to invite them to participate.
We had opportunities for staff feedback by email and phone. We had anonymous drop boxes where people could put in information. We made a video to explain what this topic was about, and then we showed it to different groups to get their feedback of what it felt like to watch this at work. Did it make sense? And receive feedback all along the way. So we've tried to make it as open as possible. It's really hard to be inclusive of everyone. It's a tough topic to talk about. People respond to it very differently. People respond to it very personally.
To move this policy forward, your team will need to discuss 3 important things: policies, guidelines, and threats. First, you'll need to decide what type of policy is right for your organization. There's a broad range of them, so is it a zero tolerance policy, a policy just focused on victims, or another combination of policies from the guidebook?
They're, hiring a known perpetrator of violence and what that means to a company, and whether they're willing to go through the steps of making sure that they aren't and or an employee that has been convicted of domestic violence while on the job. Do they terminate that employee or not? And that can be it is an extremely strong step, but that might be too far for some companies to go. And just having that basic understanding that we don't tolerate this on our workplace and that we will offer resources to a victim might be the first step.
Then you'll need to decide what guidelines will be specific to your organization. And guidelines are recommended actions that will help ensure a uniform organization-wide response to different situations.
So the policy is the flat statement of we don't tolerate domestic violence. The guidelines are more specifically tailored to a company. So how do you handle confidentiality? Are you able to handle confidentiality? How do you report cases? Where does that go? Who keeps that information? In our department, we decided to have a response team, but there might be another company that decides this person is assigned to respond and that all complaints go to one particular person. So your policy is no tolerance. How are you going to make sure that that happens?
And third, you'll need to discuss threat assessments. So what constitutes a threat and the level of risk that threat poses to your organization.
Well, we talked about instances where there might be an immediate or imminent threat, a situation where we had reason to believe that an abuser might show up at the workplace, and strategies for how to protect all the people in the workplace, the victim, but also the coworkers. We talked about certain kinds of threats that might be less imminent, less immediate to the workplace, where someone is, someone's behavior has changed. They are extremely anxious, not able to focus on their work, worried about going home, wanting company when they go places, and how we might approach that.
We hope other organizations will find this policy process to be as rewarding as we did. It is so exciting to be able to share these tools with other businesses, and we're confident that other people can now create their own policies around domestic violence and help ensure that employees everywhere are kept safe and healthy.
So training around domestic violence is tricky in the fact that you need to be respectful that any person in the room with you could be a victim of domestic violence. And so being respectful of how you talk about it, making sure that there's no judgment when we're talking about it. So being as factual as possible, laying out different options that employees have in responding to domestic violence, making sure that everyone is aware that this is not because of someone's failure in any way, that this is a relationship that is very unhealthy, it's dangerous, it can happen to anyone, and really being aware that what language you choose, how you present it is really important in order for it to be an effective message. Domestic violence is a difficult topic to talk about to begin with, and a lot of what we try and do is not to label people who are going through it. And so some people find the term victim very off-putting. They don't consider themselves a victim. They don't identify as such. And so if we're using that language, they might not feel as comfortable coming forward. They have a perception of what that word means and they don't want it attached to them. Awareness is important so that we know what to look for, so that we are best prepared if or when something happens. You know, most people do not think of domestic violence happening in the workplace unless they're aware of what to look for and how to look for it. So the best thing that we can do is have everyone be alert and aware, and really create a culture where it is comfortable to talk about domestic violence, where people are available and open to having that kind of conversation.
Well, I think you can have very frank conversations with staff, discussions about what the concerns are and why it is that you are introducing a new policy. So there can be conversations, there can be written information disseminated, and presentations at staff meetings. Those are, and also posters, you know, posters in the coffee room. It's a great way to get information out. Sometimes you just see worrisome behavior patterns in the person who's being victimized. But sometimes it can be very direct, where somebody anticipates that an abuser might come to the workplace. There was one experience I had many years ago where somebody was expecting her abuser to show up, and she took off out the back door, and the other people in the office were left waiting. You know, is this guy going to come in here? Is he going to hurt us? And at that time, none of us really knew what to do.
There's two types of emergency plans, and one is the threat of someone coming into the workplace. So someone who's actively seeking how to get into the building, who's actively seeking to get to their partner for whatever reason, you know, threatening to come into the workplace. And so having a plan where you know how to alert the staff. So whether it's a button under the table that the receptionist can press so that other people are alerted to something's going on, whether it's a code that we use internally to let everyone know that the doors are going to be locked, you need to take your key if you're leaving the building, alerting the police department. So there's sort of a high level of threat that would cause those things to go into place. And then there's just, you know, do we have an escort for someone to go to their car, to go to public transportation? Is there another way? Are there other exits out of the building that we can alert, you know, someone to and make sure that they can get out that way? And really, those are the emergency plans that you would have to put into place. By all means, calling the police is the number one thing that anyone should do if their workplace is under threat.
You've got some very clear protocols to follow about how you disseminate information. And it depends on the size and culture of any given workplace. You may use email, you may just walk around discreetly and talk to people individually. There may be certain kinds of signals that an office may develop to let people know.
I think what was most difficult is that I've never done this in this way. I've worked on policy, but it was mostly shifting language and making sure that the guidelines were correct. I've never done a policy from the beginning all the way through. And as someone who's focused on content and on direct service and working on advocating for victims, it's a very different hat to wear.
We spent one meeting starting out at one point, and a little over an hour later, we arrived at the same point. But the important thing is that we had come to agreement, and that's really important in the process. So as good as that is, sometimes it can be frustrating.
It was really interesting to see how we worked together. There were certainly times when we disagreed about how to approach any given aspect of it, and we worked through those disagreements, and I think came out with a stronger policy as a result.
The benefits of having a domestic violence policy for employers is really for the staff that they employ. There'll be greater loyalty, there's better morale, there's less turnover, employees will be working better, there'll be a safer and healthier workplace for everyone. The best reason to have a policy is so that they can have a response when something happens. And I'm purposely saying when something happens versus if, because it will happen. It's just a matter of time. So having a plan in place before something happens is the most important thing an employer can do.